Hello, everybody, and welcome to Hardlight Vedic Astrology. In today's talk, I was going to go through the analysis for the new moon or Amavasya for 4th of August 2024. And this is from a Vedic Astrology or Jyotish perspective, so keep that in mind. It seemed like the overall theme for this moment in time was staying high vibe through challenge. So let's take a look. So note beforehand, before we get started, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical, financial, professional, or life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate professional for support. And you might take a minute or two to read the rest of this disclaimer. So if you're new to Vedic astrology, Jyotish, or my videos, all my teaching videos on the subject or my concepts playlist, they can all be found there. And wherever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means there's a teaching video on that subject if you'd like to learn more about it. And all of my videos I slot into different playlists. So depending on what you want to learn more about, like I have a playlist on planets, grahas, another one on houses, bhavas, another one on yoga's planetary combinations. And so that's all out there. So it's all in that way, playlist way organized. Excuse me. For those of you who'd like to learn Jyotish by studying birth charts, I have a video that I published called Birth Chart Archives List 2024. And in that video, what I've done is listed all the famous birth charts that I've analyzed on the channel. So these can be birth charts of famous people, famous places, or famous moments in time. And because you wouldn't necessarily know, that I've done a lot of them, you wouldn't necessarily know because they're usually not one-off videos. For example, my monthly videos, I usually cover 3 different famous people, places, or moments in time. So anyway, that's kind of a way to index the birth charts for those who are interested in learning that way. There are a lot of videos, again, especially if you're new, there are a lot of helpful videos to watch with this one or before this one. North, South, and East Indian style charts. I do cover Western style charts in that video as well. Introduction to navigating a birth chart, introduction to the constellations of rashis, constellation or rashi categories, planetary aspects, initial malefic and benefic planets or grahas, chidra grahas or planets of vulnerability, planetary exaltation, debilitation, or uccha, nicca, bhavat, bhavam, house of the house concept, planet retrogression, vakri, digbala or directional strength, karako, nashaya, planet breaking house, nakshatras, lunar mansions, parivartana yoga, exchange of houses, kala sarpa yoga, the ambition combination, saraswati yoga, the artist combination, and the lugna, ascendant, rising sign, first house, all different names for the same thing. So lots to learn for you there. Okay, so let's take a look at the chart for the new moon or Amavasya that's happening August 4th, 2024. The exact time is 7:13 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's the time zone I live in. The day lord is Sun, and the hora lord is Venus. So that's already, important because as we can see here in the lugna, also known as the ascendant rising sign first house, and that is the diamond in the top middle of the top part of the chart. You can see there's a little 5 in the bottom corner there. 5 represents the 5th constellation or zodiac sign, which is Leo or Simha in Sanskrit, right? And Leo is ruled by the sun. So sun's clearly the important planet as it's the ruling planet for the whole chart. So the day lord is Sun, and the Ra lord is Venus, and we can see Venus is in the lugna here. So Sun represents things like president, king, health, soul, career, purpose, kind of big things in life. And Venus represents things like sociability and compassion and social grace. Now, the thing is that what's interesting in this chart is that we have Venus in the lugna, we also have Mercury in the lugna, and both of them happen to be in a nakshatra or lunar mansion called Magha. Magha is symbolized by a throne. And so again, you're getting this kind of royalty energy or leadership energy here. And the other thing is that Magha is related to ancestors. In Indian culture, Magha, which is related to Regulus, the star that symbolizes or demarcates the heart of the lion of the Leo constellation. That's where ancestors are thought to reside. So we've got sort of ancestral leadership or leadership through generations going on here. But also with the Venus specifically, leading with heart and compassion. Okay. So the Dasha period or planetary period is Mercury, Mercury, Saturn, Venus. So again, Mercury, Venus, I've already mentioned, and Lugna here. So, and the top, the rising sign or Lugna is all about the self, especially the self that other people tend to recognize. Um, the it presents sort of the personality most people associate with you, or the physicality, like the face and the body most people associate it with you. Just at first glance, it's not necessarily a deep interpretation, but that's what, most people would know about you. So we're back again, we're still in the Lugna here, and we have Saturn. So Saturn, you can see, is directly opposite Venus and Mercury. And Saturn is in its own sign of Aquarius or Kumbha. Aquarius is a fixed air sign. So fixed meaning that things don't change very much. It's very steady, very solid. Sort of the opposite of flexible and adaptable. And air sign means that there's a lot of ideas here. So this is, especially with Saturn, there's a planet representing things like antiquity and old things and tradition and kind of a conservative nature. We have very fixed ideas with this massive Saturn in Aquarius. So not only does Saturn gain strength because it's in its own sign of Aquarius, which it rules, you can see that little line under Saturn. That means the planet's retrograde. So in Vedic astrology, when planets are in retrograde or vakri, they gain strength. Because again, Vedic astrology is 5,000 years old, and before there were any fancy calculations or technical tools that you could use, the way that they started learning, understanding astrology was just what they could see with their eyes. And so when a planet goes retrograde, if something seems to change direction, suddenly, that sort of gathers attention or gains attention. And so just by something gaining attention, it draws you in, and and that's seen as like a sort of power that it has. Yeah. So we've got Saturn retrograde in its own sign. The other thing is that a Saturn has digbala or directional strength, and it's in the seventh house. So you have three um, ways that Saturn is super strong. Okay. Mercury is also has some strength because it has digbala directional strength and Lugna. Venus is not particularly strong. Venus is actually in an enemy sign here, Leo, because Venus is the enemy signs for Venus are Cancer and Leo, which usually we say it, and I don't know if it's just to help us remember, but Venus, can be, when it's out of balance, a planet of kind of vanity because it is a planet of like aesthetics and art and lovely things. Um, and the moon and the sun, and Venus is usually the brightest planet in the sky. Usually, sometimes because it's big enough and also close enough to the sun that it can really reflect the light. And then sun and moon are the luminaries, right? I mean, they're the planets that cast the most light. And so sometimes we just say, again, I think mostly to help us remember, is that Venus doesn't like to be in Cancer or signs of moon or sun because Venus doesn't like to be outshine, outshone. So if that helps you remember, there you go. There's a little device, memory device for you. So Venus is not very weak, or sorry, Venus is not very strong. Mercury has a little strength, but you have this massive, massive Saturn. The other thing about Saturn right now is it's in a nakshatra or lunar mansion called Purva Bhadrapada, which is symbolized by the front legs of a funeral pyre. So, so we're talking about like cremation here. So with that process, it's a very destructive process. A lot of fumes, a lot of fire. It's thought that that's an important rite because it releases the soul from the body. In Indian culture. So we've got this, and Saturn is a planet that represents things like delays, obstacles, chronic disease, and even death. So this Saturn retrograde, going backwards in its own sign of Aquarius, this is all about like the end of an old paradigm. And especially when, we've already talked about, the sun here, um, Leo and Magha, all of that, what we're looking at here is a change in sort of generational paradigms. Oh, okay. And then the other thing is that, it's the challenge here is that with this massive Saturn and Venus being not super strong, and Mercury having a little strength, but not nearly as much as Saturn, and Venus, again, is a natural benefic planet. Mercury can go either way, depending on what planets are influencing it. So I would say with this massive Saturn, Mercury's more on the malefic side. So it's kind of like, and Mercury also is a planet that represents the rational mind or analytical mind. So it's kind of like, how do you maintain your compassion and social grace and goodwill in challenging times? How do you lead with that? How do you lead your heart, Venus? How do you lead your mind in positive, affable ways during times of challenge? In the face of great opposition of longstanding paradigms that, appear to be crumbling, frankly, but, they're still grasping on. Then the thing is, the Dasha period switches to Mercury K2 on 28th of October 2024. So we're still in Mercury here, but now we've got K2, and K2 is in the second house. Second house represents things like a family, inner circle. So, again, getting at that kind of generational energy. And K2 happens to be in the sign of Hasta, not in the sign, sorry, nakshatra of, or lunar mansion of Hasta. Hasta is symbolized by hand. So you can get, like with K2, the energy of K2, the south node of the moon, is quite erratic. It's got a hidden nature, it's an unexpected nature, it's kind of can be explosive. And so with the hand symbolism there, it can be something that there's like a sudden grabbing or sudden letting go of, things. And also we have Jupiter aspecting the second house here. And Jupiter, as I've mentioned before, is sort of like Santa Claus. It's very generous. It's about justice. It's about law. It's about fairness. Um, children, teachers. So there's that kind of nurturing and education energy there. Also, oration, so speaking, and the second house also represents oral communication. So, and Jupiter happens to be in a nakshatra called Rohini. Rohini is considered to be the most attractive and sort of fertile and lovely nakshatra. So you have this very, attractive Jupiter, and Jupiter represents things too, like spirituality, um, and just sort of, yeah, and can be like a spiritual teacher. K2, even though for the most part, we usually kind of see it as like this potentially destructive energy. K2 is also a bit of a separatist planet, and there can be this sort of detachment energy with it, and especially like in a spiritual way. So you have these two fairly spiritual planets in the second house. So this could be, what I'm seeing here is this could be like there was a shift in, in the family, there was a shift in spirituality at some point. And there may be a shift going on because, again, we're moving into Mercury K2 here after we go through the Mercury, Saturn, Venus Dasha period. And that may be what the challenge is about in terms of maybe the way we used to do things, even like in our family generations. It's just not how we want to kind of be or function that way anymore. All right, so Lugna Nakshatra is also in Magha, besides Venus and Mercury being in Magha. The other thing to notice is Venus is very almost within a degree, about a degree and a half away from the ascendant. So what that means is when you start getting into the amshas or subdivisional charts or subzodiacs, they're all different names for the same thing, which are essentially those charts are like if you take each house and you slice it and dice it into different pieces, you'll get the subcharts, and the subcharts give you more information about different parts of somebody's life, essentially. You can get more details and also get more information about timing of things. So the thing is, you know, because the ascendant and Venus are so close, you have to get a very fine slicing and dicing here to split those two apart. And so what that means is, as we'll see when I go through the amshas, subdivisional charts, Venus is going to be in the lugna in a lot of the subcharts. Okay, so that's important too, because again, that's, we're running Venus right now, and Venus is clearly challenged. So the moon nakshatra, so the moon, and actually the sun as well, because you can see they're in the same degree of Cancer. They're in the nakshatra of the Aslesha. The Aslesha is symbolized by a snake. Now, depending on what planet is here and what's aspecting it, all this sort of thing, Aslesha can go either way, as snakes can go. They can be menacing, they can bite, they can hiss, they can be poisonous, they can run away and hide, they can be mesmerizing. But especially when we have sun and moon in a sign of moon. So the moon represents the mind, especially like the emotional mind, intuitive mind. And sun represents health. And, again, like the caduceus, which is the two snakes winding around the staff of Mercury, you see as a symbol for medicine. You can actually get medicine from Aslesha. It is kind of a medical nakshatra. And because sun represents general health and soul, and moon represents the mind, and they're both in Cancer, so that's going to make the moon strong, even though it's a new moon, a new cycle of the moon, and it's in the 12th house of losses and expenditures, but also like isolated places, which could mean something like a hospital or a retreat, like a retreat center, or like a ashram or church or mosque or temple or something like that. So, since Sun is the ruling planet for the whole chart and it's gone to the 12th house, and the 12th house is a moksha sthana, or a house of liberation or enlightenment, freedom, then essentially what's like, again, if we were looking at this chart as like a particular person's chart, this person, their main motivation is seeking freedom. Yeah, and you can see we've already got that essentially established when you've got this like Venus and Mercury, getting so embroiled by this massive Saturn. You know. So the moon nakshatra, I would see here mental emotional healing is what I'm seeing with the moon and the sun and Aslesha in the 12th house. Now, what was interesting to me when I was drawing up this chart as a Leo Lugna is that when I did analysis of the December solstice for 2023, about 7 months ago, it was also a Leo Lugna. So this is almost like an update chart for the year. And again, if you saw that video, one of the things I talked about was it seemed like the theme for the year, because this massive Saturn was there. It's been there for a while. It'll be there for a little while more. It was like the idea of it, and the rising sign. Oh, sorry, the nakshatra was in, I want to say, Purva Falguni or Uttara Falguni. Maybe Purva Falguni. I believe there's some planets there. I don't remember exactly, but it was this very stark contrast between this massive Saturn, which is clearly, formidable, but like quite a drag, and the rising sign, which was showing like, because Purva Falguni is symbolized by hammock or marital bed. There's a lot of enjoyment and finer things of life. So it's like this, direct contrast. And so it seemed like the theme for the year, and this is again sort of an iteration of that, is how do we maintain levity? How do we maintain lightness? How do we maintain joy and happiness during challenging times? And this seems to be another, again, a variation of that. All right, so let's go through the houses one by one, starting at the Lugna at the top of the chart. So again, we have Leo Simha, that's a fixed fire sign. So whereas Aquarius is a fixed air sign, so a lot of kind of fixed ideas, fixed fire sign is like a fixed action. So, somebody who's going to be very predictable in terms of, persistent action. So, as I mentioned, Venus is there, and we have a Digbala of Mercury, and both of those are in Magha. So again, that throne energy, ancestral energy. It is the Lugna is being aspected by Mars. Mars is also in Rohini, as is Jupiter. So Mars is a planet that represents things like leadership, kind of more of a hands-on leadership, whereas the Sun can be more like president. Mars is more like CEO, like roll your sleeves up and get the work done, be in the trenches type leader. He can also be like commander in chief of the army, that sort of thing. So a little bit more force and action, and maybe less theoretical, less of a figurehead potentially. Um, is that kind of leadership energy that Mars brings. So we have leadership energy, over and over and over again in the Lugna here. Right? We've got Magha 3 times, and it's ruled by Sun, and we've got Mars aspecting here. So this is all about leadership, especially of self, I would say. So, and what else? We have this massive Saturn in Purva Falguni. So when we put this all together, oh, what else? Oh, sorry, no, I thought I confused myself for a minute there. So when we put this all together, so leading with high-minded thoughts, and feelings, that's Venus and Mercury. And actions because of the fixed fire sign and Mars, and change because of Saturn. And again, the Lugnatia and the Moon are both in Aslesha. Lugnatia is the Sun, the ruling planet for the chart. They've gone in the 12th house, Moksha Sthana. So again, if this was a person, primarily motivated by freedom. But I would say again with the Moon and Sun in the 12th house, and it's the sign of Moon, looking at like recovering mentally and emotionally, physical health, maybe through retreat or meditation or travel. Taking a break in some ways. And there could also be, because when we see planets in the 12th house, because it's the house of losses, that can indicate, big places in our lives where we feel like we've lost considerably. And so the sun, represents things like father and authority. The moon and the president, and the moon represents the queen. So again, that's another authority. And mother, and so together you get parents and authority here. So again, this is where I think, again, we're getting this energy of ancestors, and losses through ancestors. So again, if there's a break in the, hereditary chain, mentally and emotionally, and that's what it seems like here. And that's important because again, when somebody changes on a deep level, mentally, emotionally, that'll affect the way they talk, that'll affect the way they make decisions, and that'll affect their actions. So it's a deep transformation. Um, so again, we're seeing more of that here. There are several yogas in this chart. Yogas are planetary combinations. So we have Kala Sarpa yoga. Only Saturn is on one side of the Rahu Ketu axis. That'll bring ambition and also kind of unusualness to this moment. We have a Shasha yoga with this massive Saturn in its own sign in a Kendra. That's going to bring power. Even though there's a lot of destructive energy, it's going to bring a lot of power. And the thing is, again, like, even though, Saturn is going to be quite destructive at this time in many ways, because you have this massive Saturn in the seventh house can indicate things like finding your way through life. So, even though there's challenge here in many ways, like again, if this was a person, if by persevering, they will find their way. So, that's good news. We also have a Subhaveshi yoga, which is a solar yoga, because we have Venus and Mercury, two benefics, in the second house from the sun. That will bring things like, being well spoken and being attractive, and also, uh, you know, staying in good company, positive company. And there's also a Saraswati yoga here. So that's the placement of Venus and Mercury and Jupiter. Saraswati yoga brings education and creativity. Uh, So, again, we have, kind of a duality uh, in this person. They could be, again, maybe initially quite traditional, but what I'm seeing here is that eventually they're gonna kind of find their own path that's a bit deviant or to their previous ancestors. Yeah, so their ancestors. Sorry, just trying to stay hydrated. It's pretty hot where I am today. Um, okay, so the chidra grahas, these are planets of vulnerability, so you can think of them as sore spot or sensitive area or thorn in their side or Achilles heel, that kind of energy. So what's interesting is that, when you have the amshas and when you have access to the amshas, there's four of these. And the sun was a chidra graha twice, and Jupiter was a chidra graha twice. So, sun, as we mentioned, father, authority. It's the ruling planet of the chart. It's gone to the 12th house. So, and with sun, as I mentioned, um, there can be issues here with authority, because just by the sun being in the 12th house, I would assume that. And Jupiter, so again, generation, Jupiter represents things like, it can represent things like teachers, which potentially could be a problem here. The reason why father can be a problem and teachers and authority, besides like the sun and the 12th house, is that this massive Saturn is aspecting the 9th house, which represents father, authority, and guru, religion. And this massive Saturn is debilitated in that house, 9th house. So that's like another layer of this. That's another, indication of confluence, building up that energy here. But I didn't, again, so Jupiter could represent teachers, but Jupiter can also represent children. So, we're not running Jupiter here, but, since Jupiter is a chidra graha, children could be a sensitive spot for, like, again, if this was a person. So we've got generations here, right? So my actions, like if I follow the footsteps of my ancestors, not only where will I end up, but where will my children end up? And we'll see that that becomes more important, as we do the deeper analysis. Okay, so then we've got some money info here. So the yogi graha, that's Rahu. Rahu will indicate some amount of wealth. Ava yogi here is Venus, which can represent dearth. So, and then the duplicate yogi is Saturn. So that's kind of interesting actually, because Saturn, even though it's massive, there's still some, wealth to be derived from Saturn. So this might actually indicate, since it's the 7th house where Saturn, this massive Saturn sits, indicates like business partners and spouse. This can indicate like wealthy partnerships in those areas. The other thing, more money stuff, is that Mercury in this chart happens to be both the second lord of assets and the 11th house of income. And Mercury is sitting, in the Lugna here. So we've got, let's see, in the Lugna we have Saturn, the duplicate yogi, we have Venus, the Ava yogi, we have Mercury, lord of the 3rd and the 6th house, we have, and Rahu's in the 8th house of other people's money. So what I was seeing here, especially with the Mercury drawing, so when you have Mercury in the Lugna in a Leo rising chart, it's going to draw second house energy of assets to the Lugna, and it's going to draw energy from the 11th house of income to the Lugna. So what I was seeing with this is that essentially this person, especially their mind and the decisions and their speech, are what give this person wealth. Like whether it's truly monetary or, how would I say? Well, actually, I mean, not to get too much into his chart, but for example, ex-President Trump, who is now the Republican nominee for the upcoming U.S. presidential elections coming up in November, he is a Leo rising. So you could get a little bit, in terms of his chart here, like, like what is he doing right now? He's going around and speaking, right, to raise money. And, his 7th house here with this massive Saturn, he's trying to, buddy up with wealthy people, right? Fund his campaign. And, he's trying to, what do I say, and kind of steer the government, the ninth house, right, where the Saturn is debilitated. He's trying to switch the structure, right, and move it from, because it's right now in the Democrat hands of the Democrats. He's trying to switch it not only into his hands but the Republican hands. So he's trying to um, alter. I don't know. Destroy seems kind of strong, but like alter, change the structure of the ninth house of government. So anyway, so you could see a little bit, there with him. But so in general, but again, if we were looking at this statically, not dynamically, so again, if this was like, a person's chart, home's chart, but somebody else, I could see that where their speech and compassionate speech and ability and leading others through difficult times with positive, compassionate speech and thoughts and actions, this is the person's true wealth here. I mean, whether, and it probably results in like dollars or, whatever country you're in, pesos or rubles or whatever. But that's the person's real wealth here. And that's what I got from, again, just looking at, again, the money planets. But it told me more than just about like, the monetary, addition here. So what else? I mentioned Venus is going to be in many amshas because it's a degree and a half from the Lugna. Oh, the other thing of note, which is important, which you wouldn't necessarily recognize right off here, but we're heading into two different planetary wars or graha yuddhas here. So first, we're going to have Venus and Mercury. Those are the two fast-moving planets, and you can see they're only 5 degrees apart. So over the course of the next week or so, they're going to be in planetary war. So we're going to have this head-to-head, challenge of the things that Venus represents, like feelings and relationships and compassion and the fire things of life with Mercury. It's a very feeling planet and warm and fuzzy planet usually. With Mercury, which is a more analytical and logical, type planet. So it's kind of like mind versus emotions. Again, this is happening in the Lugna, so the area itself. And the Kendras, which are the four houses in the middle here, the Kendras represent kind of the core energy of somebody. So we're gonna have a planetary war. So, person, like again, this is a person they would probably be wobbling between Venusian energy and Mercurial energy coming up next week when that war goes on. Then, and it's almost like, how are we gonna lead ourselves forward? Are we gonna lead with our logical mind? Or are we going to lead with our, emotions or maybe some combination, that sort of thing? Because you can see like sun in a couple weeks, on the 4th, yeah, like 10 days or so, 10, 11 days after this, the sun is going to come into Leo. And then there's going to bring a lot of energy, a lot of power, sun actually, a lot of fire to a fire sign. Then it's like, it's really going to be on, in terms of, again, like a person. So again, it's interesting that the two planetary wars are happening before Sun moves into Leo, because it's almost like, let's figure out exactly what we want to say and do and how we want to be, how we want to carry ourselves moving forward during this challenging time. So the Venus Mercury war happens, and then not too soon after that, not much later after that, Mars and Jupiter are going to be in war. So the thing is that, again, Jupiter and Mars are not in the Lugna, but Mars is aspecting the Lugna, and Jupiter and Mars are also in Kendras. The thing that was that Jupiter and Mars are in the 10th house of daily activities. So it's kind of like, and they're both in Rohini, but in the middle of the war, Mars will shift into Mrigashirsha, which is like a seeking type energy nakshatra. So I don't think there's going to be like a huge violent fallout from, um, especially the second one, Mars and Jupiter war. But I would say that this is going to be a challenge or pushback, and maybe even legally, because when you have Jupiter and Mars together, that can give the energy of legality, because Jupiter represents law and Mars represents fighting. So it can be legal issues. Um, What else? So yeah, so I think with these two words, it's kind of pointing at, it's almost like begging the question, like, who do you really want to be? Because it's almost like what philosophy are you going to use moving forward, um, to help you decide your words and actions and, that sort of thing, decisions. So that's all going on. That's kind of the backdrop for the chart or this moment in time. Let's look at the other houses. The second house, as I mentioned, second house lord is Mercury. K2 is there in Hasta, the hand symbol, and then it's aspected by Jupiter and Rohini. So what I could see here is supporting the inner circle through optimistic, potentially spiritual talk, because again, K2 and Jupiter are kind of spiritual planets. And I would also say that this might be like a releasing hold on material assets. Um, yeah, because what I was seeing here generally was it's almost like, we'll get into this more, is like, what do I say? Because again, I kept getting like questions with this chart. Like, it's almost like no matter what the outcome, like, it's almost like people charging into war or something like that. It's like, I don't know how things are going to go down. I don't know if I'm going to survive or not, or, if we're going to win or not. But how do I want to be, as a person? What do I want to represent as I head into this kind of unknown, challenging space and time? And it's almost like, let the karmic chips, fall where they may. But I'm going to be me. I'm going to be my authentic self. I'm going to maintain my integrity. And then, you know, again, the karmic chips fall where they may. That's what I was getting from this chart. Okay, so then, so this the second house. That's why I think that's why that thought came to me when I was like the second house, because again, it's almost like the more important thing here is not the grabbing of assets, but the being true to self. That's again the real wealth. Okay, then the third house lord is Venus. Um, so besides kind of supporting people through optimistic talk, I think that's also happening through written communications, is what I was getting here. Then the fourth house here, fourth house lord is Mars. This aspecting its own sign, that's going to make it strong. And then you're going to have an aspect by Saturn and Jupiter. So the Saturn is very destructive. The other thing is that fourth house represents home and property, and Mars and Saturn are two planets that represent property. So, again, there's this tension of old ways and new ways, or old guard and new guard. Um, Here, there could potentially be, and also like, Mars is in Rohini. So Mars, the new guard is about building new beautiful things, and the old guard is about let's destroy the old. So there's a tension there. The fourth house also represents like not only family lineage but spiritual lineage. So what I was getting from this chart, especially because the sun went to a moksha sthana, already from that, like that alone, like when you look at the Lugnatia, the ruling planet for the chart, and which kind of house it goes to, I can tell you a lot about somebody. I've actually seen a number of charts of people who have interest in like alternative stuff, like yoga or alternative medicine or things like Jyotish or something like that. And they have a lot of interest, but if their ruling planet has not gone to a moksha sthana, I find that they kind of like it ends up being more of a hobby for them rather than like a true passion or vocation. Like they may not pursue it full time. Because again, if their ruling planet has gone to like a Artistana, which is a house of, material gains, they're going to be, when push comes to shove, typically they're going to be more interested in building things in a material way. So, so this is clearly very already like quite a spiritual chart here. Yeah. So, the fourth house also represents things like, happiness and optimism. And we have Jupiter, the planet representing optimism, shining in here. What I was also seeing here with Jupiter and Mars, because again, Jupiter is spirituality and Mars is action. And this massive Saturn in its own sign, I've mentioned too, is that a lot of times when I see Saturn in its own sign, when you have a really strong Saturn, there can be a lot of tradition, especially related to India. So, this could be, again, choosing your own path. That's like maybe your family's, I don't know, Christian or Jewish or something, and then you decide to follow, yoga or, start listening to Sikh or Hindu, spiritual discussions or something like that. Yoga itself is like spiritual but not religious, but there might be a deviation here. The other thing that I could see here is karma yoga. Because Jupiter again is like charity and goodwill. And Mars is a very physical planet. So this could literally be like, working in a soup kitchen or, at your religious center with whatever faith, and like feeding people who don't have food and, um, and seva, like um, physical acts of service. Um, so yeah, there's, yeah, again, tension here in the fourth house. The other thing is the fourth house represents education. So, and Jupiter is a planet that represents education. So I could see again that there's this kind of, two malefics on the fourth house, and Jupiter's in there, but Mars is going to be the strongest planet because it's aspecting its own sign. And then you have this massive Saturn. So again, the Jupiter is diluted a little bit like Venus is diluted in the Lagna. And the education potentially would be very practical. Because when you get Mars and Saturn together, you can get things like engineering, usually like math, science. Jupiter might be biology, but again, it could be like biomedical engineering when you get all three together, Jupiter, Saturn, Mars. Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the fifth house. The fifth house lord is Jupiter. It's aspected by Mars. And the sign here is Sagittarius, so it's a dual fire sign. So this is it can also be like a university, educational. The fifth house is also like a counseling um, house, and the fifth house also represents children. So, what do we have here? What I was seeing here was like, with all this together and Sagittarius, like, acting, because Mars is action. So acting from a philosophy of positivity. And I would say not getting distracted by the persistent negative ideas of others. So again, it's like keep being you, keep being light, keep giving and smiling and being kind, even if um, it seems like the whole world isn't. Even if it seems like you're the only one. You know, um, kind of like I think I wrote this later on, but I guess it seems like it's kind of now the time to bring it up. It's almost like I remember at least once, probably several times, but one that specifically that stands out to me is like I don't know. I was having a bad day, stuck in my own stuff, and who knows what I was upset about, but probably nothing of consequence. Um, but I go to the grocery store and I'm paying for my groceries, and the cashier was like, when I was leaving, it was like, "Yeah, I hope you have a really great day." And the way they said it was so sincere, because you hear that a lot, and a lot of times it's kind of a vacant or empty, phrase. But the way they said it and the presence at which they said it, I really felt it. I felt the kindness of that kind of um, intention or blessing being sent my way by a stranger. Um, and it completely changed my energy. I was like, why am I so upset? Like, here's this kind person, just sharing a good energy. And it's things like that where sometimes you don't even realize one small, thank you or hello or how are you doing today? How much of a difference that can make when somebody's not is questioning whether, there's goodness in the world. And I think we all potentially go through that, during tough times. So, so again, that adds another layer to this of like, how do I move from this, being a positive light in the world type energy, keeping my vibration high, even when others around me seem like they're getting sucked into a vortex of negativity. That's kind of what's going on here. Um, okay, so the sixth house here, the sixth house lord is Saturn, this massive Saturn, and we have aspected here Moon and Sun, and a debilitated Jupiter. Okay, so debilitated Jupiter, not a lot of strong Santa Claus energy. So, and that sixth house can be acute issues, but also a house of enemies. So parents or enemies, because again, moon and sun, mom and dad, there can be issues with mom and dad not having a lot of support or, um, what would I say? The enemies, if they are the parents here potentially are much more practical and less kind of spiritual. They're more, again, like focused on what they see and acting from that rather than um, choosing the way they move forward in life through how they feel and what they believe, like their philosophy. You know, um, so yeah, that's what I was saying here. And it's not that they have to literally be enemies, but like, not on the same page, so it doesn't have to be. But again, because this massive Saturn is there, is the ruling planet for the sixth house, there's some shift that's also going on here. There's, some tension here. So that could be it. It's just, again, like, it's almost like, there's like this crack in the earth. It's like, well, this is the way my parents did it, but I'm going to do things a different way. So, yeah. Okay, so this slide, same stuff on the right, new stuff on the, oh, sorry. Same stuff on the left, new stuff on the right. Sorry, it's like, I think it's Mercury retrograde coming up in a few days. I find it's harder to do these videos. Mercury retrograde is going on. And last year, the Mercury retrograde was going on at the same time as the eclipses, and that was just, it was like good luck trying to get these videos done. Yeah. Anyway, let's try our best today. So so the stuff on the right is notes for the other house. So the seventh house, this massive Saturn we've been talking about, and it's aspected by Mercury and Venus. So again, there's strength here, but also acute problems because Saturn's the lord of the sixth house. So problems with partner, but strength too. So like if we were evaluating the partner, they're holding tight, but there's definitely like a major shift going on. The other thing is that this massive Saturn, as it's like steamrolling through Aquarius and aspecting Mars, both like again, if the native of this chart and their partner are both going through a massive, developmental change of self. Um, shifting at conservative ideas we talked about. Also Saturn, like I could see this, even though there's strength here, I would say the partner, there's a like chronic worry, anxiety, doubt, um, and again, rethinking, and that's the thing is like it might seem like, especially if the native is trying to stay, high-minded and, happy and chipper and joyful, because that seems like their way of doing things. Um, you've got this massive Saturn influence here. So in order for that relationship to continue, both people need to change. All right, so then the eighth house here, the eighth house lord is Jupiter. We have Rahu here, Uttara Bhadrapada. That is symbolized by the back legs of a funeral pyre. So there's destructive energy here too, but it's much more contained and also like a conscious release. And whenever you see Rahu or Ketu or a strong planet in the eighth house, it usually indicates somebody who has a very kind of alternative or independent mindset. Not the kind of, they're not one to typically follow the crowd, which again we've been seeing already. So yeah, I would say, again, this person is, doing what they can to maintain objectivity and not be attached. Again, it's like this idea of like let the karmic chips fall where they may. I'm going to be me. I'm going to live with integrity, and whatever comes of that comes of that. And then I think also this person might be in this kind of phase of like letting things pass or evolve naturally rather than um, being so hands-on controlling. Like we had this Jupiter with K2 and Hasta in the second house. So it's actually like letting go. And even like mentally, this person is like letting go of like old structures within the family or old, maybe expectations within the family. And again, the Lord is Jupiter. And Jupiter is in Rohini. So, um, even though it might look chaotic or stressful, I think this person's doing pretty good with sort of maintaining their own little happy bubble, or maybe happy, or like just peace bubble, peace bubble, maybe more than happy, despite the changes and that are going on or challenges. Then the ninth house lord is Mars. It's aspected by this debilitated Saturn. So again, upheaval with father, government, religion. We mentioned that. The 10th house lord is Venus, and we've got Jupiter and Mars here. So inspired in action and leadership. The 11th house lord is Mercury. Again, leading through positive speech, thoughts, example, being this example, right? I mean, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. And then, yeah, and then at this point, when I got to the analysis, all these different kind of stories and phrases started coming to my head. So I thought, well, maybe I'm supposed to share them. Um, so what I was also getting from the 11th house here is that like all it takes is one, because again, you have Mercury, it has Digbala. Oh, I didn't mention Mars also has Digbala, but I didn't think that was super consequential. But so Mercury's strongish. Venus, it was okay, but this massive, there's this massive onslaught by Saturn. And it's kind of like, again, like, being the one person in the crowd who doesn't go along with the plan or with the, what the majority says. And that can be tough, but that can also be like a true moment of leadership. And one of the personal stories that came to mind when I got to this energy in the chart was back in the day when I was in medical school. It was my first year, and somehow my class, we didn't even know each other. Somehow my class, they decided that I was going to be president of the class. I don't have no idea why. Anyway, so I show up to the student council, medical student council, first day. Didn't know anybody, didn't know anything that was going on. I was just showing up to represent my class. And the discussion was all about, there were some problems with the administration, like apparently severe problems, because the discussion was all about that they were trying to agree that when students went to the administration and even the dean, that they should record the conversation. So I was like, wow, that's some pretty deep stuff if we're kind of going down that road. So I'm just listening because, again, I'm like the new kid on the block. I don't know what's going on. And I'm listening to this. And again, if you know my work, I'm a doctor, but I'm a naturopathic doctor. So it's about holistic medicine, right? That's what we're there to learn for 4 years. And then I pop into, the student leadership, having this earnest discussion about this. And, again, I was like, here I am, here I go. I guess I'm going to make enemies on day one. But I just said, so I just kind of at some point jumped in and I said, well, I guess what I don't really understand, or maybe what's, I have a hard time getting behind this because, here we are, all of us, we all chose to be here and spend 4 years of our life learning holistic medicine, right? I mean, mind, body, heart, spirit medicine here. And yet we're talking about like, secretly recording conversations with the dean. Like, I don't know, like just that doesn't sit right with me. Like, it doesn't seem like that's the naturopathic way of leading, us into a better situation. it got quiet, and I was like, okay, yeah, I definitely made it. I had no idea what people were thinking. But what happened after that, it was almost like the energy shifted from just like, like the angry crowd, with the lit torches, like going up the hill to like, kill the vampire or something. Where I was just like, I'm not gonna light a torch. I'm not gonna go up there. I'm not gonna do that. Yeah, I can't support this. And the energy started to shift, and a couple other people jumped in and started supporting what I said. And so again, maybe it was my naivete or whatever, but that was a personal example of how I felt this kind of energy of this mass, like kind of negative wall, and I had no idea how things were gonna happen or play out, but it actually ended up being a good thing. And then within a year, we got a new dean who was actually very good, very spiritual guy actually, and then. He and I worked together, and because our school was in such bad shape, that's what everybody was worried about. Everybody thought, the school was going to close down, and they would have to transfer to another school. And there were only 4 naturopathic schools in the United States at that time, so it was going to be a big change, and people didn't want that. But it's like, the new dean and I, we worked a lot together um, to improve things, and actually, within a couple of years, we got the school accredited, so it was more stable and students eventually became happier. But it was like it was an important moment, in terms of just deciding how I was going to be, regardless of what happened. I was like, I don't know, but I just can't support that. So anyway, for some reason, I thought I was supposed to share that. Maybe somebody needed to hear that today. Then the 12th house lord, just to finish up here, the 12th house lord is a swa moon in its own sign with sun. So I could see this again with these being an Aslesha, like this kind of world healing of humanity's mind and soul. Like this is a very deep, the sun and moon combination, the 12th house is quite deep, I would say. So as I mentioned, some phrases were coming to me as I was finishing up the analysis of the chart. So again, the kind of energy of this chart is like that. I believe it's by Gandhi, the phrase, preach with your perfume, which is not so much about force people to do things or preach, to people about doing things. But, just by, walking your own walk and talking your own talk, and sometimes you don't even have to say that much, but just by doing what you do and being in integrity with yourself, people will notice and end up kind of following you in a way. Um, and then I was looking that up on the internet, and then another one popped up. And apparently, Mother Teresa had a similar kind of prayer that she would say where she said, "Help me spread your fragrance everywhere I go." So she's specifically, talking about Jesus, that was her faith. So again, she was talking about spreading the light, as she's walking with sick and, homeless, people in India. That's, just the population and the circumstances she was up against. That's like this massive Saturn retrograde Bala, in Aquarius type energy that she was up against. And so every day she just kept showing up and asking for the energy to keep doing that. um Another one that popped up: be in this world but not of it. That's just kind of like, just keep showing up, being you, doing you, don't be attached. um not, and also don't get distracted by the mundane. uh be the change you wish to see. I think that's another phrase sort of along these same lines. And another thing that popped up, which again was a little bit unusual, but again, maybe somebody needed to hear it today. Was I remember there's this book that U.S. President John F. Kennedy wrote called Profiles in Courage. And in that book, he was a senator from Massachusetts before he became president. And his work in Congress, I guess, motivated him to write this book. But he wrote the book about 8 people, I think mostly politicians, who, despite any personal negative consequences they might have incurred, decided to stand up and say what they were going to say or vote a certain way against the crowd. Um, to be in integrity and also to ultimately put the needs and concerns of the United States as a whole above themselves. And so that's the kind of energy of this chart. Yeah. So anyway, I think these stories and phrases and even this John F. Kennedy book, it's all about saying the same thing in different ways. If it's like, you be you, you keep doing you, even it seems like, everywhere around you is like darkness and negativity, you can, without realizing it, be lighting a torch for other people in a positive direction. So, all right, so let's look at some amshas here now. Okay, so here are the zodiac, sub-zodiacs, amshas, divisional charts, all different names for the same thing. So I'm going to start off with relationships, as I normally do. And just to remind you, the current Dasha period is Mercury, Mercury, Saturn, Venus for this chart, and it's going to switch to Mercury K2 on the 20th of October 2024. Now, again, the sub-zodiacs are mostly for timing. So the planetary Dasha period planets, what I've done is circled them because those are planets that are going to be more kind of active or influential at this moment in time. You can get other information, other details from these charts, but you always want to bring it back to the natal chart. So just keep that in mind if you're learning about amshas. Okay, so the top chart here is the Navamsha D9 for spouse and partnerships. The second one's a Drake and a D3 for siblings. So, what do we have here? So all the grahas are well placed. That's nice. However, we have Venus at the top here. And even though that kind of recreates the natal chart in some ways, when we assess the D9, when we see Venus and the Lugna, even though Venus is Swa here in its own sign of being strong and making it strong, Venus is the Jiva Karaka, or the living symbol for the D9 of partner, because Venus represents spouse. So when we see Venus in the Lugna of the D9, that usually means that there's issues with the spouse. Not necessarily between the native and the spouse. Sometimes just the spouse can have um, difficulties, like ongoing difficulties, mental, emotional, physical, financial, what have you. But so, again, when we saw that massive Saturn in the seventh house of the natal chart, it's like, clearly the spouse is not, is up against some serious stuff right now. So yeah, so we're seeing it again here in the D9. Saturn is debilitated. Oh, Saturn is there with the debilitated K2. Um, let me go back over this now. It should be Saturn is with an exalted Rahu in a Papsankhya Yoga. So, we have three malefics, K2, Mars, and Saturn on Venus. So, that's a lot of that's a lot of negative energy on Venus because it's almost like recreating the natal chart where you had, this little Venus, kind of almost nervous, shaking, new Venus with all this like negative energy around it. It's kind of the same thing. But then with the Pop Sankhya Yoga, like that's going to bring Saturn down. And what else do we have here? There's a parivartana yoga here between Jupiter and Moon. Jupiter is spirituality, Moon is mind. So we're going to have, again, a very spiritual mind here for the spouse. Um, oh, and then I was going on about Venus here. I was like, where's this? So Venus, sorry, hold on a second. Okay, sorry, I was just trying to sort myself. So, yay, Mercury retrograde. All right, so essentially what I wrote here with Saturn there's a debilitated K2. They're both going to be in Pop Sankhya Yogas with Rahu, so that's going to bring them down. Venus is a sole enemy of K2. So again, there's there's a lot of opposition here with malefics. But again, there's strength, like the same way that we saw that, Saturn, even though there was clearly some stuff going down. Saturn was still in its own sign. There's going to be still strength for the partner. And then Venus is going to be in Mishra, mixed Sankhya Yoga with Rahu. So that's going to bring it down. But again, the partner, like the native, it looks like, is quite spiritual minded. And maybe the partner's Indian, actually, because of that, as I mentioned, Saturn in its own sign. Could be. Then we have, let's see, Mercury Swa. Okay, so we have a strong Mercury in the second house. And with the parivartana, it's almost like you could see Jupiter, Sun, and Moon in the eighth house of deep psychology. So you have Mercury and Jupiter, like the two education planets and speech planets, with Sun and Moon. So, emotional, spiritual speech, leading speech, again, so kind of similar to the native chart. So, because the planetary, like the dasha planets were like Mercury and Venus, Saturn, right? Mercury, Venus. Yeah, so again, it's like the whole 1-7 axis of self and partnership. So there was a lot of mirroring energy going on there. We're seeing it again here in the D9. Then the Drake into D3, we have a Vargodama Lugna, so same Lugna as the natal chart. That's going to make this chart important. And what I could see here was it looks like the siblings, are kind of acting in a similar manner as the native. So there might also be like a generational shift, like at this generation of this, is where the breaking point is in the family line in terms of the way they operate or their values or something. So what do we have? We have Saturn and Ketu are not well placed. Saturn's exalted, so that gives it some strength. And again, the third house, is a sibling. So sibling of sibling gets us back to the natives, which, makes sense. And then Mercury and Venus in the Lugna, like the natal chart. Mars is in Virgo in the second house. So there could be a lot of talk about very practical, tangible things here. And Saturn and Mars are aspect in the fifth house, so it has an engineering mind. So what's interesting is like it looks like the sibling is kind of a mix of, thinks like an engineer, talks like an engineer, but actually, their personality is very high-minded, like the native. So it's again a little bit different from the native, but essentially I think similar. I think the native is probably a little more. Well, no, I can't say that. I was going to say that, but see, you kind of get this Jupiter K2 lineup again in the sixth house here in the sibling, which you had Jupiter and K2 in the second house for the native. So I think there's a lot of similarities here. And then what do we have? A debilitated Saturn. Oh, yeah, this is the ninth house. So debilitated Saturn and Mars aspecting the ninth house. So this, again, like in the natal chart, descent with strong leadership. KT debilitated Jupiter in the sixth house. And then Saturn, Jupiter with Rahu in the 12th house. What I was getting here is that, the sibling, like the native, seems to meditate in private when challenges arise to kind of get their bearings and kind of clear their mind and, get clear about how they want to proceed. And like the native, because of this debilitated Jupiter and K2 in the sixth house, they may not be finding a lot of compassion from their, you know, enemies, quote unquote enemies, but opposition, similar to the native. So yeah, a lot of marrying going on with partner and siblings here. In this next chart, we have subzodiacs for the Saptamsha D7 children, the Dwadashamsha D12 parents, grandparents. Based on what we saw in the native chart, you can probably guess what's coming from the D12 parents, grandparents chart. But okay, so the D7 to start with children, it's a Vargodama Lugna. So again, even though Jupiter didn't pop up much, we did see Jupiter being a chidra graha twice over. And look at what we have here. So children are important. So again, it's interesting. The siblings and children are important. So again, it's like a generational shift here. Mercury and Saturn are not well placed. Saturn's debilitated in the ninth house where it's aspecting. So again, issues with authority here. So, again, the native, the siblings, and the children are all going to be, independent minded, doing their own thing, not following the crowd, it looks like. We do have a Mercury Venus parivartana exchange of houses here. And so look at this. So it basically brings Mercury and Venus to the second house of oral communication, aspected by Jupiter. Mercury will be in its own sign. That's a lot of beautiful conversation there, speech. So like the native, right? It's like positive, leading with positive speech, heart, intentions, actions. So it looks like the children are going to take that up another notch here. And then the thing is, not only do you have Mercury and Venus aspected by Jupiter in the second house, but then you have Mercury and Venus aspecting Jupiter swa in the eighth house here. I mean, children here are going to be like, I would say trillion mastered. I mean, the eighth house is also a house of enlightenment, and freedom, moksha sthana. So, yeah, I mean, whatever generational shift is going on here, boy, the children are going to be like the angels among us, looks like, based on the. Um, let's see. Yeah, Mercury, Venus, parivartana with Jupiter in the mix. Beautiful spiritual thoughts, decisions. Venus debilitated is there, but it's nicca bhanga. You break that debilitation because of Mercury. So, so again, this is also indicating the second house is not only speech but the family. So their family of origin. So the children growing up with this native is going to be, again, taking on all these positive qualities and characteristics. Yeah, and then I was just reflecting. Exalted Venus, debilitated, bhanga, Mercury, Swa, Jupiter in the eighth house. So that's deep thoughts, beautiful thoughts. Moon is exalted in the 10th house with both aspect of Mars and Sun. So again, beautiful mind and thoughts, and leading with that, right? The 10th house is daily activity. So um, I think the main difference between the children D7 subchart and the main chart is that the children don't have to they're not the ones breaking the chain with parents here. They're just, learning and following the parents' footsteps. So they don't have that kind of, drag or big wall of opposition that the native had to come up against. So again, leading high-minded, soulful actions I was getting here in the 10th house. Venus and Mercury are in a Mishra Sankhya Yoga with Saturn. That's going to bring it down a bit, but there's so much strength in the second house. I was like, I'm not really worried about it. So there might be like a little bit of a challenge because Jupiter is a soul enemy to Venus. But when you have all these, benefic planets together and just a little bit of a drag with Saturn, I was like, there might be a little bit of a challenge, but not nearly as much as the native. And this is not something I would worry about, really. I mean, then the Dwadashamsha D12, parents and grandparents. Well, Saturn and Mercury are not well placed. The other thing is that kind of like we had Venus and the Lugna for the D9, and Venus is the Jiva Karaka, so living symbol for what the D9 represents, which is spouse. We have Rahu here, which represents maternal grandparents, and that's at the top of the chart in this D12. So it looks like there's issues with maternal grandparents, and maybe that's where the breaking point is. Yeah, some kind of problem there. Maybe that was that Saturn aspecting the fourth house and that sort of thing. There's a kind of a generational break at some point. Um, Sun and Moon in the sixth house. So acute issues, mom and dad. I mean, we're not running those planets, but that's the D12 here. And what I was saying too, you have Venus in its own sign in the second house. So it looks like there's like affluence or like social, like worldly success, I would see here, because Venus is in some ways, very worldly type of energy. It's about the finer things in life and, friends and people and socializing. It's the worldly advisor. A very strong Venus here in the second house of family. So again, it looks like, the family is has done quite well in the material world. And that may be why, like the native, for example, seems to not be so into that. Um, because part of that too is like, building wealth potentially and having a big house and car. I mean, it's not that it can't be spiritual, but a lot of times it's like a keeping up with the Joneses type of thing, you know. It's like whoever has the biggest mountain of goodies wins, that kind of energy. Um, then you have Jupiter aspecting the 11th house where it's exalted. So again, you have Venus, Swa in the second house of assets. You have Jupiter exalted in the 11th house of income and also of groups, clubs, and societies. So it seems like, at least up until the grandparents level here, they were well off, well to do, well respected in the community. And maybe the native was just like, you know what, that could be like the golden handcuffs, like, yeah, maybe that's all nice and fine, but there are other prices to pay for all of that. Yeah. What else do we have here? Mars is Swa in Scorpio, plus Saturn and Mercury, aspecting the ninth house. Oh yeah, like, again, reconstructing the mind and authority here. Major shift going on because the Mars, Saturn, Mercury is aspecting the ninth house of authority. Yeah, okay. So then we have education and career. As I mentioned, because that massive Saturn was aspecting the fourth house of education, probably expect some issues, and we're seeing them here. So the top chart is the Damsha D24 for education. The second chart, the Dashamsha D10 for career. We have Mercury, Saturn, Venus not well placed. Okay, a lot of channels at this time. Mercury is debilitated. That's an education planet in the sixth house. That's with Saturn, and we have Sun on that. We do have Jupiter on that as well. So there's some protection here, but a lot of challenge, just with that, from what I said already. The Lagnatia of the chart is Venus has gone to a negative house. That's not super great. Um, Mercury is aspecting its own sign with Moon and Sun in the 12th house with Saturn. And that was interesting too. I was wondering if because there would be losses here potentially with Moon and Sun. So maybe the parents didn't have a lot of opportunities for education, is what I'm saying here. So they may not have had as much been able to be as supportive just simply because they didn't have the experience themselves and they can't, offer much advice because they weren't in it themselves. But you can see here you have Mars and Rahu and Ketu. In debilitated Mars, Rahu, Ketu in the 10th house of daily activities. Like, yeah, I'm just seeing this as like not a lot of consistency, a lot of unusual breaks here. Again, there might have been education, but um, not higher education because you have that massive Saturn debilitated in the ninth house. So I don't see more than like a college education. And I think that college education is probably pretty challenging for the native, although they might have finished. But it was a haul. Let's put it that way. Then the Dashamsha D10 career. Mercury's not well placed, but it's in parivartana with Mars, so that's nice. That'll bring it up. And Mercury's in a Shubh Sankhya yoga with Jupiter. That'll bring it up. Then we have Venus, Sun, Moon. What do I have? Venus, Sun, Moon, aspecting. Oh, and then the Jupiter. Okay, so you have Sun, Venus, Moon, and Jupiter all aspecting the seventh house, where Jupiter is going to be Swa. Again, what I've seen here with the career was that Sun, could be like health, Venus, Moon, women, but also emotions and mind, and then Jupiter here. Um, when I see this together, I could see like maybe a holistic practitioner, somebody who's interested in mind and emotions and body, potentially family medicine because you have women and you have children from Venus, Moon, Jupiter in the 12th house. I would say this is a very strong combination for, being an entrepreneur. Like maybe this person, like this whole like, stay high-minded despite opposition thing that they have as part of their personality actually, is what they do as a career, like as a private holistic health practice. I could see here. You have an exalted Saturn and K2 in the second house. So, Saturn and K2, that could be like foreigners or poor people, which are actually assets to this person. Also, foreign languages. Um, then we have an exalted Saturn in the fifth house of counseling. So this would be like an innovative practical counselor. And then you have Jupiter exalt in the 11th house, so charity and humanitarian groups. Like this could be like a Doctors Without Borders type person. Or, it could even be like they don't even have to go abroad, but maybe that like they work in New York where there's so many different, I mean, people from all over the world and, they just open up their doors like, maybe a less served area and just see who they see, or they're, working with homeless people or what have you, um, trying to bring light to those areas. So again, the uh, holistic health practice. Well, the thing is, they wouldn't have a higher education, so probably not like a doctor, but social worker, I could see. Yeah, social work. Yeah, social work is what I could see. Um, like maybe up to a master's level, but it's where it's like more practical, like more of a internship type education rather than like classroom type stuff. Yeah, that's what I could see here. Okay. Then sub-zodiacs Amsha's wealth. Rudramsha D11 for income at the top and Chatrachamsha D4 for assets. Saturn is not well placed in the D11. That's in Pop Sankhya Yoga with Sun. That's going to bring it down. So Saturn's going to be a drag here. However, you have Venus and Jupiter, a mutual aspect on the 1-7 axis. That's going to bring a lot of positive energy. That's a Shubh Sankhya Yoga. That's going to they're both benefic planets, and especially when you have Jupiter in its own sign in the Lagna and Venus exalted there. I mean, there's income to be had here. And the thing is, again, if this person was a social worker, it may not be that, they're I mean, social workers don't tend to make much money, at least where I live. But this might be actually like getting grants because you have this strong ninth house, like Mars in its own sign, Rahu Ketu. So it could be like this person's really good at like getting government grants to fund their social work type thing. Yeah, and then also like again, when you have this Venus and Jupiter Swa and the Lagna with this Venus here, I would just say again, this is like an earth angel type person where it's like their primary income is derived from themselves, is like derived from their goodness. Like that is what's, you know, uh, generates their income. Uh, their caring nature. Venus, Jupiter, I mean, that's like, consulting, uh, advising, counseling, kindness, Venus and Jupiter. And I mean, this is like you can't believe how generous and kind this person is kind of energy. There might be some tension though, because Venus and Jupiter's a sole enemy of Venus, so there might be some tension. I would actually say the tension may be an overgiving here, because you do have, this going across the 1-7 axis here of like independent business and stuff. So maybe they run like a nonprofit, like they're a social worker type, who runs a nonprofit and gets government grants, is what I'm seeing here. Yeah, head of an unusual organization. This is Rahu, Ketu, and Mars in Scorpio. Mars and Scorpio. It's like a very transformative type thing, unusual. And yeah, so and then Chatra Tamsha D4 assets. So we have let's see, Ketu is not well placed. We have Venus here, so there could be some vehicles. Saturn, Mercury in the fourth house. So you have Mars and Saturn. You have two planets representing property in the fourth house of property. So there's probably some, and then generational here. This could be multiple family, land, property, assets. It could be. But kind of like what I was saying before, like we have Jupiter aspecting its own sign with K2 in the eighth house of deep psychology. This again is going to bring a very alternative spiritual mind to this person. And the eighth house not only represents deep psychology, but it represents inheritance. So again, it's like the real wealth of this person is their mindset. Uh, because again, from all that, like all the rest comes, right? The speech comes, the decision comes, the standing up, even though, you might get completely shafted, because you're just doing what you feel is the right thing to do. That's where this person is going to get all their goodies, but, goodies essentially coming from this person's good karma. Right? Because at the end of the day, when we're reading these Vedic astrology charts, it's all about do I have enough good karma for this, or is it the bad karma for preventing me from doing this? That's people don't usually phrase their questions that way, but that's essentially what we're doing here. So, yeah. See, okay, then we have health stuff here. So we have the Tajik Shashtamsha D6 at the top for acute issues, the Tajik Ashtamamsha D8 for chronic issues in the middle, and the Bamsha D27 for strength and resilience at the bottom here. So in the top, all grahas well placed. So that's nice, considering this massive Saturn on the Lugna in the natal chart. There's a parivartana yoga between Sun and Saturn in this chart. So what that means is you would have Sun and Saturn in the fifth house. Sun represents heart, and the fifth house represents heart. This person could have heart issues. The other thing is you have Moon, Mars, Sun, Rahu, Ketu. So you have 4 malefics on the Moon in the fourth house. And Mars and Ketu, Rahu can be injuries. And Sun, again, can be spine or bones. So this is somebody who might have either, and the fourth house can be like spine or knee. So this is somebody who might have or will have at some point, most likely spine or knee pain, surgery, accidents. But for the time being, I don't, yeah, especially when you bring Saturn in here. So actually, you have with Saturn when you do the parivartana, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 malefics. Yeah, I would say that there's some kind of like skeletal injury, accident, something that went on here or is going to happen for this person at some point. But right now, there might be an accident coming with this K2. Is what some unusual freak thing that happens. That's the K2 energy. Then the Tajik Ashtamamsha D8. Mercury's not well placed, but Mercury and Saturn are in Parivartana. So you're going to Mercury and Saturn all over the place here. And with Mercury and Saturn in the third house, I would see that as being arm or shoulder pain, potentially. I would say too, because when you bring Mercury here, you're going to have Rahu, Ketu, Saturn, Mercury all along the 1-7 axis. I could see like a chronic issue being somebody feeling isolated. So again, if you're the good vibes fairy, trying to stay happy and positive, for yourself and others, like there aren't so many people who do that. It's really easy for people to, and through conversations, it's like to start complaining, even about the weather. Like it starts with the weather and it just like, it's a slippery slope into deeper areas of complaints and stuff. Yeah. The other thing is that you have Rahu, Ketu, and Saturn in the Kendras here. So again, the Kendra is the 4 houses in the middle. That's a central energy. And Rahu and Ketu and Saturn all represent like foreign or unusual things. So this could just be feeling like a fish out of water, like kind of like you're a little different in the way you do things, which is what, brings this person a lot of, greatness, personal greatness and material greatness. But it can feel isolating, with the person. Then you have the Bamsha D27 for strength and resilience. Mercury's not well placed. And the Sponsor is debilitated. It's a debilitated Jupiter. So since Mercury's in the sixth house here, I could see there being issues during this Dasha period with friends and communication and decisions. So again, I think this is the wobbling of the person of like, there's a lot of oppositions. Like, do I just go with the flow and go with the crowd, or do I just stick to what I'm doing and, my kind of more spiritual, unattached way of trying to stay high vibe, is what I'm seeing. But Mercury's aspecting its own in the 12th house. So again, retreat and meditation helps to get clear. It's like the natal chart. We have Jupiter and Saturn in a Mishra Sankhya Yoga across the 1-7 axis. This again was kind of like the natal chart because when you get Jupiter aspecting into Cancer in the Lugna, that's like an exalted Jupiter. That's spirituality, high-mindedness. And then you've got Saturn retrograde Capricorn. It's like you have this spiritual, emotional energy in the top and this very practical, juxtaposes very practical, slow, delayed, energy in the bottom here. Um, yeah, it's just this, contrast, it's similar to the natal chart. And in the end here, we have the sub-zodiac for spirituality and formal worship. The top is Panchamsha D5 for innate spirituality, and then we have the Vimshamsha D20 for formal worship. So at the top, K2 is not well placed. There's an aspect by Mercury and Saturn in the eighth house. So again, feeling isolated here. Venus, and we've seen that feeling isolated in several ways. Like even in the natal chart with that, you know, Sun and Moon in Aslesha and Cancer in the 12th house. That was some of that too. And then that massive Saturn, Saturn's like a cold, distant, isolated planet in many ways. Let's see, Venus. Oh, see, here we go again. Venus with the Swan Jupiter in the Lugna. A lot of, good vibes here. You do have an exalted Saturn on it. So again, like the natal chart. So, and the Saturn's coming from social groups here. So social pressure to squelch the natural kind of energy and passion, I would say, of just, you know, people may not like you, or whatever, because you're like the one who's always like happy and cheerful and trying to do good deeds. It's like, it's like they're like, what are you doing? Could be like that. There's a Saraswati yoga here with Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter, the way it's placed. So there's some artistic, creative energy here. With Mercury and Rahu in the second house, I could see this being like a foreign, arts involving speaking, writing, foreign language, like almost like a singer-songwriter type. So even though there's some isolation here, I think again this could be like especially when you have this Venus, Jupiter, and the Lugna here, this could be singing. And then the Mercury Rahu brings in like like a foreign language. So this could be like kirtan, right? Like singing, chanting, Sanskrit mantras and stuff like that, or something along those lines. But it's more like kind of a creating the lyrics and singing a bit on one's own. And then the formal worship here, so Saturn's not well placed and it's debilitated. Venus, though, is exalted in the second house. So again, they're singing here. And now, potentially. And then we have Saturn aspecting Mercury, KT, Rahu in the fifth house. So now we have, you know, three malefic planets on Mercury, and Saturn and KT Rahu again represent things like foreign. And there could be like technology here because of KT Rahu. And the fifth house represents like mantra, yantra, tantra. And the Mercury's in its own sign that often brings, interest in like meditation. This could be like, what could this? This could be like I, whenever I've pulled together playlists for like yoga music when I've taught yoga classes, I would get kind of the more traditional, you know, uh, kirtan stuff. But then nowadays, like they're kind of some of the kirtan stuff, they put it to like some jazzy digital beats, and then it's almost like a, you know, club music for yogis type of music. I could see that kind of stuff going on here where it's, there's some like digital version of kirtan that this person is performing because the performance is like this fifth house with Mercury in its own sign, and Saturn, KT, Rahu. So there's some performance, I think, there. And then Saturn is aspecting and exalted in the ninth house here with Mars. So this is, authority and institutes. So this could be like going around to different, temples or ashrams or something and playing this digital kirtan stuff. Could be. And then you have the you have Saturn aspecting its own sign with Jupiter in the 12th house. I could see this being like foreign or distant spiritual retreats, you know. So again, the singing, songwriting thing might be on one's own and kind of a natural thing one has always done. And then it looks like bringing that into a more public performance, traveling to different spiritual centers, performance type thing going on in formal worship with others. Yeah, so there you go. Okay, so as always, thank you for your time. I appreciate you stopping by and listening to one of my talks. All my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology are in my concepts playlist. A list of all the birth charts I've analyzed, famous birth charts I've analyzed on the channel, are in my video titled Birth Charts Archive List 2024. So you can find those charts. If you're individual, I do offer individual birth chart readings live on Zoom and as a recorded video. If that's interesting to you, you can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com for more info. I have another YouTube channel on natural medicine where I talk about Ayurveda, traditional Indian medicine, and yoga, as well as other paradigms of natural medicine, so homeopathy and naturopathic medicine. The name of that channel is Nature Source Care, so that's out there too, if that's something you're into. Thanks again for all your support of my work in the channel and all the different ways that you guys do that. And as always, I hope you found this talk helpful, useful, and interesting to you as you learn to navigate the energy cycles of your own life. All right, so until the next one, take care and namaste.